How do you make black concrete? Well, if you're going to be experimenting with coloration of concrete, the first thing that I would want you to know is that it's a pretty deep technical subject and there's a lot of variables involved. There are a lot of variables involved. And when it comes to the coloration, I always warn people, look, I could deliver something like that's black concrete or charcoal or dark gray, but it's not going to be specific. Like if you're very particular with the color that you want, it must be this exact shade of gray or of black, forget about it. It's not going to happen because the mineral content of the water or the amount of humidity on the day that you do this coloration or how old the concrete is, meaning is it fully cured or is this concrete green and this is still, or this is much older, like it's, you will have a lot of problems if you are trying to get an exact coloration for your concrete. That's pretty hard to do. If you want black concrete and you're willing to accept whatever you get, as long as it's darker than the regular light gray concrete that it would normally be, you're going to be happy with it. Well, then I think that I'm more inclined to say, okay, go for it. You could probably do it and be happy with the results, because the problems with concrete, if you do a coloration to it and it's like, you know what, I hate that. Well, you're totally stuck with it now, so that's your problem. And that's the risk with coloring concrete. And anytime, as a contractor, if I'm doing a job and somebody says to me, hey, I want to do a patio here, but hey, let's do some like fancy color, I'm immediately nervous because the chance of there being a problem or they're not happy, like it goes through the roof, because everyone has a different idea in mind when it comes to color, and some people see color differently than others, and it's more important to some people than others. So I really feel the customer out when we're talking about coloration of concrete, and especially when it comes to integral colors. That's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about here, is a coloration or a dye, a pigment that's added right to the concrete mix. So if you were to have some concrete and it's black or dark gray and somewhere to chip or flake away, if you use like a topical coloration like acid stain or paint, you're going to see regular light gray concrete underneath there, and it's going to totally ruin the look. The advantage of an integral color is it's all the way through the mix. It's an admixture. You mix it right in with the concrete, and then it's, if you have a chip or a defect later on, that color maintains throughout the entire concrete. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage being is it's extremely hard to get consistency between the coloration. If I were pouring, a sidewalk or a deck around a swimming pool, and I'm going to need a couple of trucks of concrete, I'm going to be very concerned that truck 1 doesn't really match truck 2, doesn't really match truck 3. It happens all the time. So definitely don't underestimate that. If you're thinking, well, that shouldn't be a problem for me, it might very well be, unless whatever you're doing can be done in a single batch and you're willing to accept whatever kind of results you're going to get. So let's talk about this admixture. Like, what are we going to do here? For the average person, the average homeowner or do-it-yourself enthusiast, hobbyist looking to make some black concrete, this is going to be the first product that you reach for. And the reason why is just simply availability. This is something that's available in pretty much every big box hardware store, so you're probably walking by it every time that you're shopping. So this is a liquid dye. A little goes a long way. However, it's kind of relative to what you're doing. If I'm going to be making a little happy face with my mold here, so I need a very small amount of concrete. I'm going to use a very small amount of this pigment. If I were pouring a sidewalk, how it works is the ideal amount they tell you to use of this product is one of these liquid bottles for every 2 80-pound bags of concrete. So 1 bottle to 2 big bags of concrete. And they also advise, if you want a more intense coloration, you can go as much as one of these little bottles for every 60-pound bag. 1 bottle per 60-pound bag. That's a lot. Like, for every bag of concrete, you're going to need a bottle of this stuff. What I'm doing is I'm going to just use a very small amount of it here. And in doing so, what you'll see is that, I mean, it's black, but really, actually, it says it right on there, charcoal, in fact, which is good, because if you want black concrete, it is very hard to get jet black concrete. You could get charcoal or dark gray, but you're going to fail to get this very like midnight black coloration. You're not going to get that. And further to that, with a dark gray or a charcoal color to your concrete, it's going to really highlight inconsistencies in it. If there's a scratch or a trowel imperfection from finishing flat work, or things like if there was too much water raised during finishing or too much calcium in the water that was used or calcium added to the mix, you'll get white striations and concrete burn and all sorts of visual imperfections. So black concrete or dark gray charcoal concrete, it's one of the more challenging ones to work with. That being said, if you're just a homeowner or an enthusiast and you want to try making some black concrete or as dark as you can make it, this is probably the product that you're going to be trying first because it's the most readily available. And why don't I go ahead and mix them up and show you how it works, show you what you can expect to get from it. So the mold that I'm going to be making here has a little bit of fine detail in it. So the mix that I'm going to use is 2 parts sand to 1 part cement. If I wanted the optimum mix for strength for a mortar, it would be 3 parts sand to 1 part cement. But it's going to be a little bit coarse and I'm going to lose a little of my fine detail there. So that's why I'm going with a 2-to-1 mix. And the sand that I'm using is clean washed masonry sand, sometimes called brick sand. It's basically just pure sand, absolutely no stones in it, no impurities. It's graded, cleaned, and washed. The type of cement that I'm using is type general use Portland cement, type GU. And the type that you use might be different depending on where you're located. It's sometimes called different things. Type general use, type N for normal, type 1, or type 10. Those are the ones that I would be looking for. And you could also just ask for, like, look, what's the most common one that you sell? And it's not a pre-mixed bag of concrete with some Portland cement and some aggregates mixed in already. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for just Portland cement because you're going to mix the aggregate manually. And in this case, I'm going to do a 2-to-1 mix here. And that's what I have in the bucket behind me here. I have 2 parts sand, 1 part cement. And if you're unfamiliar with mixing concrete, all you need to take away from that is it doesn't matter whether I'm doing shovelful to shovelful or, you know, a measured cup or a 5-gallon bucket. As long as the ratio is observed, that's the important thing for mixing concrete. So with a 2-to-1 mix and a very small amount of concrete needed, I'm not going to need very much of this stuff. And in a previous video, I made this guy here, and this is from the red concrete, how to make red concrete video. And I used about 3 teaspoons, about 15 milliliters of this stuff here in my concrete mix that I'm going to make, which is going to fill this. And then the amount that I use in the slurry, which is what I'm going to get the finer detail with in here, is basically the smallest amount which I can pour into this container. I know some people were asking about that before. And the reason why is because I need to be able to paint in a fine Portland slurry in there to get to make sure that I don't have honeycombing of the concrete. And if you're a novice to working with concrete, you might not understand why I'm saying this. Here's the importance of it. When I put my concrete in here, I want to choose a concrete that's going to be suitably strong so that my piece doesn't break. In order to make that, I have to make the concrete very dry. Novice concrete workers have a tendency to overwater concrete, by a lot actually. Concrete needs very little water to actuate. So you make it watery because it makes it easier to place into your mold, and you'll think you'll get finer detail, and you will, but you will have compromised the strength completely. So how you counteract that from a more professional approach is to use a slurry of Portland cement and water and paste that in to get the finer detail, and then have a drier, stronger concrete mix or mortar mix and put that on top, and that's the structure of your piece. And that's what I did with this guy here, and as you can see, it turned out really well. There was no honeycombing at all in that. And that's a really nice casting. I'm very pleased with how that turned out. And as you can see, it really picks up a lot of the fine detail. So that's a run through what we're doing here. I've got the 2-to-1 mix in the bucket back there. I've got just Portland cement in this right now. I'm going to add some water and some coloring. Actually, I'll do that right now. Just add a little bit of coloring to this. And again, in this, there's just a tiny little bit of Portland cement. And now there's a little bit of water too. What I'm going for here is kind of like melted butter or cake batter. A little bit more. Okay, so I've got kind of like a liquidy. Let's see if I can show you there. I don't know how well you could see inside that, but like I said, look at cake batter or melted butter. And I'm going to pour in some of this iron oxide based charcoal coloring. See how little I can manage to pour. It's pretty thin, so it pours quick. Got like 2 little drops in there, but that should be enough because this is a very concentrated pigment. And the reason why is concrete, I mean, it's gray and it wants to stay gray. It's very hard to color concrete. A little bit more water there. Alright, that's looking good. Let's let that sit. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to mix up the concrete that I've got in the bucket back here. It's not very much, you know, just enough for my casting here. And again, I'm going to aim for about three drips of this, or about 15 milliliters. That's what I'm aiming for. And that's equivalent to about 5% of this bottle. I think I have something I can work with there. Okay, so I'll show you what it looks like first. So as you can see, it's not so thin that when I vibrate it, it just completely falls off the trowel. Even this is a little bit thinner than I wanted. I might add just a bit more Portland cement and sand there. But first, I'm going to add the dye. So again, at 1 bottle for 2 80-pound bags, I've got just a tiny little bit here. I have estimated that I'm aiming for about 5% of this bottle, 15 milliliters, which is about 3 drips. See how I do? It's hard to show it. I'd rather just be careful and not overdo it here, so I can't show the camera too carefully. 1, 2, 3. I got 4 there. They were small, probably pretty close to what I'm aiming for. Because it again is a very intense dye. We'll see what this ends up looking like. Show the camera how essentially you can't see anything. That just looks the same as before. Even in person, it pretty much looks the same. With the red one, I was able to get just a little bit more coloring, and the drops that I put in were just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to add just a couple more because I think that it should be a little bit darker. Could you just, you know, throw in a whole bunch? I mean, you probably could. I've done it before. It still worked depending on what your application is for. But the manufacturer recommends maximum amounts to use, and I don't know why they recommend that maximum amount. I'm assuming they had a reason for it, and so that's why I'm encouraging you to follow those instructions as well. It will be interesting to see how dark this gets. I mean, I can see it's a little darker than normal. Very underwhelming. I mean, if you're here looking for some jet black concrete, you're not seeing it yet. It will look darker once it's cured versus what it looks like wet in the bucket here. Okay. Switch back to this slurry for a second here. What I found with the last red casting that I did is that the slurry actually helped quite a bit to give it the coloration that I was looking for in the finished product. The slurry has probably a stronger pigmentation than what the measured amount in the bucket has. So it's even darker, it's more dark than what the rest of the concrete is. And show you what I mean. You can see here, this was a more vivid red color than the backside. The backside's, you know, not quite as intensely colored, and that's what will end up happening here as well. Let's go ahead and paint all that right in there. I use mold release in my molds, and that's why you see like a little bit of an oil and water reaction happening here, but it is a product specifically made for concrete applications, so I won't have any problems with it. Now this slurry that I'm pasting in here doesn't have any sand in it. It's only Portland cement and water and dye. What I'm saying is it's not very strong, so you wouldn't want it to be thick of just Portland and water. You need the strength of this mix here. But what I've just done there by painting that in, it is going to give it a more intense coloration, but it's also going to help me pick up a lot of those fine details, and it's going to help limit honeycombing of the concrete. I could also eliminate the honeycombing of the concrete by using water reducer or super plasticizer in my mix, which gives me a thin placement viscosity without the dramatic strength loss that you would normally get from overwatering. It's just like overwatered concrete, but you're chemically doing it with a super plasticizer so that it doesn't compromise the strength when it cures. Let's go ahead. I'm going to put this in quickly here. An important point with a slurry, you want to paint it in and then add your concrete over top before it dries. You definitely don't want to let the slurry dry before I get my concrete in there. I don't know how much it'll show on camera here. It probably just looks like, you know, regular old gray concrete mortar. It's definitely darker. I mean, I work with mortar and concrete often, and I can tell that it's much darker than normal. Is it black? No, I wouldn't say so. But you're gonna be hard pressed to get jet black concrete. I think this is what you'll get, is something that's, you know, gray, dark gray, charcoal, but you'll also get a lot of inconsistency with the coloration. And if I made 10 of these on 10 different days and compared them, they're all going to be different. First of all, because I'm adding manually the coloring agent to it, and even just as I mentioned before, the humidity and things like that will affect the finished coloration. Like if I let this set up and right before it's hard, I get in there and I trowel half of it but not the other half, those two halves will have totally different colors. It's very sensitive to the different parameters, and if you're really particular with what you want for your coloring, you need to do a lot of test applications with this before you just commit to, you know, pouring a new pool deck or something like that, because I really encourage people to not do that if they're particular with coloring, because it's just a complicated subject and it's hard to have control over that finished coloring. Even if you're really good at what you do as a contractor, there's just things that can, you wake up in the day that you're doing it, it's really humid. Now the coloring is different than what you thought it was going to be. That's hard to deal with. But if you're looking to make some black concrete for at home, I think this is probably the first thing that most people are going to look to, something along this product here. And this should give you a good idea how to work with it, how much to use, some of the problems that you might encounter when you're trying to work with it for the first time. And if you found this information helpful, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can check out my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com.